Okay, we're live on the air, folks. Welcome along to another show. This one's under the name On Human Relations with Other Sentient Beings. But as you can see, me and Ronnie are still alive, so there's a bit of a...
I was almost asleep after that intro. I nearly dropped off. Very gentle compared with our other shows, isn't it?
Oh, what, you like a bit of razzmatazz, do you, Ronnie?
Well, it wakes me up a bit, to be honest.
Oh, okay. I didn't think we would have to. So this is our second 3 p.m. for us show. And so, as usual, it's been streamed out to 3 different places, two Facebooks and my YouTube channel. So the best interaction is on the YouTube channel. So if you want to leave a comment on any platform, we'll see it. It's just that you won't see any replies unless you're on my YouTube channel. That's the best place to be. Then in regard to the questions themselves, we never charge for them. You know, we don't do super chats or any of that capitalist nonsense. So just feel free to chat away, and we shall put your comments on the screen if they get past Andy's filter. So that's how we're going to do it. I want to say sorry for the lack of diversity on the panel. It's a little bit white, it's a little bit male, but this is what we've got. And then in terms of the audience and who they'll know, our audience will be obviously familiar with Ronnie and Andy. So Neville and David, would you like to maybe give a very brief intro of yourselves, and then we're all set up to go?
Yeah, shall I kick off, Neville?
Yeah, go on.
Go on then. So hello everyone.
It's good, Neville. Is there a bad Neville, by the way? I wanted to ask before.
Yeah, but you don't want to meet him.
No.
Yeah. So hello, I'm David Finney. So I'll try and keep it brief. I train businesses up and down the country on quality management and environmental management. When I'm not working, I am a mad music enthusiast. So I'm in a local choir, and with my cousin and good friend Martin, we record albums together, which is great fun. And when I'm not doing that, I volunteer for Humane Being, and we've been running the Scrap Factory Farming campaign for about nearly 6 years now, I think it is. I went vegetarian when I was 42, and a few years later I became vegan, and I've been vegan now for 9 years this year. Yeah, I think 9 years. So is that okay?
Yeah, you're never in your 50s. I don't believe that for a second. I thought you were about 25, David.
Well, it's very kind of you to say so, Roger. I'm not getting into any kind of age comments, but it was good to meet you last week, Roger, for the first time. And Ronnie, I know from our Greens for Animal Protection days. So, and we got some great animal rights policies into the Green Party. But anyway, we're doing different stuff now. Yeah.
So Neville.
So so I'm Neville, and sort of go by the handle of Good Neville. It started as a joke because people called me Neville because I didn't know how to say it, and so Good Neville sounded funny, so I've stuck with it. Anyway, I've been vegan since Brexit. I don't quite know how those two things ended up lining up, but that's how it ended up happening. And I got interested in scrap factory farming primarily as a sort of a response to it being a sort of practical way of addressing climate crisis. And things sort of evolved a lot since then, but that's how I framed that's how I got interested in that. And so I'm really interested in trying to sort of make veganism make sense to to all sentient beings. So that's my pitch.
Yeah, I love that you picked up on that. That's great. Okay, so our kind of discussion topic today then is in the description on YouTube, which is the end of all animal farming is the aim of veganism. But how does the vegan movement achieve its goal, and how long will it take? I think we're all going to say too long on that one. Should it start off campaigning to end factory farming, or focus on vegan education? So that's our kind of remit to chat about. And anybody in the chat itself, if you've got a question for any of the panel or all, let us know and we'll put it on the screen for you. So does anybody want to kick off with that one?
I thought it might be interesting to, I guess, figure out at the beginning what everyone's kind of understanding of veganism was, so that we knew that we were all on the same page when we talked about it. I mean, I know Ronnie's pretty well, obviously, but yeah, obviously, I guess that would probably be the easiest place to start.
Okay, it's against cruelty to animals, isn't it, Andy?
Well, I mean,
that's what veganism is all about.
There are, like I said, it would just be easiest to know where we're coming from, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, do we define veganism? I mean, David, how do you define veganism?
For me, it's the end of cruelty, confinement, and exploitation of animals. It's leaving animals alone and letting them run free and do what they do, and we get on with our stuff. That's to me what it is. Obviously, speciesism comes into that, but yeah, that's ultimately why I became vegan.
Very good. Neville, maybe?
Yeah, go on. So as I say, my notion of what veganism entails has evolved, and I kind of got into it self-interestedly through sort of plant-based eating, and I very quickly realized that was like a very little part of a very much more interesting story. And ironically, as it became sort of more complicated, when I learned about, oh, look, it impacts climate, it impacts pollution, it impacts waterways and all the things that SCRAP stands for, it then went suddenly simpler. It's about right to life of sentient creatures. And once you assume that just that one right, everything sort of follows. So that's my very, very simple proposition, really.
Indeed. I like the idea that it gets more interesting rather than it gets more complicated, that's really good. There's freedom, liberation for all sentient beings and care for the earth. Now, obviously, one interesting thing about veganism is that a lot of vegans kind of seem to adhere to their own version of it. I mean, this might be a kind of pre-question, but is it a problem that there isn't a general agreement about what it means, or do you think that people just muddle along and it all turns out all right in the end?
I think, yeah, that's a really interesting question, because as we know, people sometimes change their diet, and they say they follow a vegan diet, and they probably don't get that. Sometimes the way I look at it is the animals don't care. They don't care why we're doing what we're doing. If you're in a factory farm, it's get me out of here. I'm in hell. So I presume everyone on the call and the people watching, we all get that. But I personally don't see the problem with someone going vegan for the planet, which I've heard people say. Vegan for their health, well, we'll probably say, well, technically that's plant-based, but it all helps. It all helps.
Is there another, so if you said there's sort of positive diversity in argumentation, and then there's muddle, right? Right. So if you have something that you're trying to encourage people to do, so long as they do the thing consonant with that belief, it doesn't matter at all what the thinking that led them to that. And what to me is unique about Scrap is that it's really broad church. Like, you could literally be a NIMBY, right? And go, I don't want a farm being built in my little rural Lidl. And that be a perfectly reasonable, that would get you on the, get you in the right place in terms of action, legally, resisting having that factory farm in your location. So that would, so there's a broad, if you set up a broad church, so long as the action is focused, you're all right. I think there is a danger of muddle, but I don't see it in the fact that you encourage different kinds of understanding of the underlying principle.
Okay. And what about the distinction between vegan and plant-based? Some people think it's useful, some people think it's not. What do you think about that?
Well, just
Andy,
very quickly.
You can talk.
No, I was just going to say, I was just waiting. I would go back to the example that David gave, I suppose, to kind of answer that question. So, yeah, I mean, it's great if someone considers themselves vegan because they no longer consume animal products. And obviously the animals that are consumed, they just want out. That's absolutely correct. The danger of that, though, is that this person that now considers themselves vegan without seeing the bigger picture, there are animals that also want out that are being used for their skin, that are being tested on, that are being used for entertainment. And without that greater understanding being given to them, they're all being left behind by someone that thinks they're doing enough. So I do think that distinction is really important here. If someone already thinks that they're vegan when they're already only doing, say, 10% of what a vegan entails, then there's a real danger there that animals will get left behind. Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's a very fair point. But I do know one person that went, vegan for the planet, which we know isn't technically veganism, and now totally gets it. He's pieced together everything and now understands all the principles. So are there different ways of getting there? I would say yes. And I kind of, although it might annoy us that someone's saying, oh yeah, I'm vegan and I don't have any animals and maybe not do any of the other things, it is helpful and it may lead to them understanding.
True, but I would say obviously the bits that added to that were the education. That's the really key component. So yeah, they have to make sure they've got access to either in-reach or further outreach to connect those dots. So yeah, I mean, the education part is crucial all along, and I don't think that we have enough of that. Especially when you've already making that first step, for example. Like, we could potentially put forward an argument that there's a lot of people that do outreach, but once you've been shown Dominion, for example, or been told to go and watch this particular video, there's not a lot that comes after that. And I think that's where the real education is needed for exactly the reasons you're talking about. If someone says, I'm going to stop doing this because I want animals out of factory farms, unless someone else in their life has got that information to provide them, there's a lot of times that they might not find it. Because, I mean, most people don't know another vegan, or they're not part of groups naturally. So they need some sort of, like, I don't know, information given to them to keep them interested at the least, to keep looking otherwise. Because otherwise, I mean, it's just natural for them to think that they've already done it, because no one's kind of given them any further information, or there isn't a door that's at the end of this road, because they just think they're there.
Yeah, I mean, someone else wanted to speak.
No, you carry on. You carry on, David.
I was just going to say, I remember the very moment where I turned from vegetarian to vegan, was seeing a shed of cows in a mega farm in the southwest. I think it was in Devon, and it was part of a Guardian article. And the farmer was smiling in front of the cows, and the researcher had found out that the cows weren't let out. They had all their food brought to them. That's what made me turn. And then, of course, the rest of the picture fitted. So people take different routes. They're not all going to go at the same pace. And I'm really worried about the pace of the education piece, really worried about it, because at what point is that going to work? Whereas if we can appeal, well, we're asking the government to begin the phase out of this kind of farming. If we can pull that off, and we're not the only ones doing it, Animal Rising have completely switched their philosophy. If we can do that, wow, what a difference that can make, because it's about over 80% of the country's farming.
Absolutely. I guess my counter immediately would just be, but without people no longer wanting to consume animals, you can't remove the kind of, I don't know, the industry that provides those. It's kind of like prohibition without education, right? Because, I mean, factory farms exist because huge amounts of people demand those products. Taking those things away doesn't change that demand without education. It just takes away the facility that provides it.
I think this is definitely the strongest argument against scrap as a principle. It seems to me it's this argument that goes something like, let's see if I've got it right, that doing some sort of prohibition, right? Let's say that you manage a UK-wide prohibition of factory farming, right? So there's sort of two ways that will play out. One is it's like leads to a kind of what's that word? Banning alcohol. What's the word?
Prohibition.
Prohibition. Yeah. So you do a prohibition, right, and then that leads to all sorts of nefarious activities. The formation apparently of the mafia was because of prohibition in America. And on the other hand, let's say it doesn't go quite that way. It turns into a luxury. It's something you import, like, I don't know, cigars or something. And then it becomes a status symbol for the wealthy, right? As like kind of grass-fed beef or something is at the moment. So both of those look like a big problem for anything that's trying to sort of do prohibitions. So that looks pretty bad. However, the idea that you can educate the population sufficiently to, on their own steam, under their own steam, do it as completely as you would want, so that they both don't do it and don't wish to do it, seems idealistic, in the extreme. So you're between two quite unpalatable.
There definitely needs to be a combination. That, I mean, I think that's apparent. But I think the real danger.
I'm not sure that works either.
Well, I think, I mean, although the comparison to alcohol is kind of valid, I think the real difference here is that we're talking about something that the vast majority of people do. Whereas you could have already considered alcohol as already in some of those niches as being a luxury. It was already imported. It was already something that the wealthy could afford to do in terms of extremes and all of those sorts of things. Whereas when we're talking about the consumption of other animals, this is something that almost everybody does. And so unless you're going to kind of change what they want when they go to the supermarket, or change what they demand when they open their phone and do their shopping, then I don't see how realistically we could get rid of those things without serious concerns about how they acquire those products, because that demand isn't being challenged. That's the key part of why speciesism is so important to kind of like unlock and unpack. Because that's kind of like what this thinking is behind it. This is the mentality that fuels all of this. And I don't think that's even being addressed, let alone sort of like challenged here.
I think you've explained why it's not being addressed, is because there isn't, it's so, in inverted commas, natural, it's it's how, you know, it's how you make a meal for people. It's what what expensive clothing looks like. It's, you know, all these things, right? So the idea that there's some sort of mental process that turns people with that kind of thinking, what you might call speciesist thinking, into complete vegans, I don't know what that is. And
I don't think that needs to happen, though. I think, I mean, that would be perfect, but I don't think that's what needs to happen. Even if you could just offer the education to the point that here's a viable alternative that does all of the same things, you've given them a second option. Whereas just taking away the one thing that they want and expecting them to sort it out, it kind of, there's something missing there, because they're still going to want those things. And so, I mean, although I wouldn't be over the moon with it because I'm ethics based and I want to educate people, even if you could explain, hey, there's this plant-based whatever, there's this particular pleather pair of shoes or jacket, there is a like for like alternative, which is why we're going to look to remove this system and replace it with this one. See, that's something that people could buy into, but just taking it away from them without telling them why and expecting them to get on with it and deal with it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, no, they need to be told why. No, that's part of our plea to the government. Well, our request to the government is you must explain why you're doing it, because otherwise, so we've said you've got to tell people what's happening in these farms. You've got to explain to them how it's harming our rivers and how it's harming the environment generally, and then they will buy into it. You know, like when the pandemic was on and the government finally told the nation, this is what we've got to do and this is why. And most people did it. We made sense of, if I stay at home, I won't spread the disease or be impacted by it. So absolutely. So that's the education that has to happen. I think the full deep explanation that you're saying, Andy, which I don't have any issues with at all, it's a long-term thing. One of the comments said, bringing that into schools, and I have spoken in schools and colleges, and it's a strong resistance to life change, because we're battling with generations of people who have been brought up in a way that they don't see an alternative, and that's the battle. So I think your education is long-term. I don't see it as quick enough.
Yeah,
but I embrace it, and I think there's room for both.
Just to add on it to it anyway, and it might just be at least my personal opinion and my sort of personal representation of what veganism is. But I would like to see that education start at school level. But I would like speciesism to be taught as a subject, because then we're no longer just talking about non-human animals. If you recognize that racism, for example, homophobia, transphobia, whatever, all of these were just the same arbitrary lines, and this was the same prejudice that you're taught or you're brought up in an environment where it's normalized. If we were taught that at a base level, then so many of the problems and the injustices that exist at adult level would have already been addressed. So, like, I definitely know that this is a long-term thing, because it's much bigger than just stopping what we do to non-human animals.
I think that's fundamentally where I part company with you. That the idea that there's this easy and unquestioning line of bad things, racism, what was it, the list of, racism, sexism, transphobia, and then we're going to add on speciesism.
No, I think speciesism is literally, so imagine a tree. Speciesism is the tree. Homophobia, transphobia, these are just branches. So just chop the tree. That's prejudice. That's where prejudice is coming from.
No, I just don't see that at all. So,
but I mean, how would you differentiate then between how we prejudice, so discrimination against non-human based on their species, based on their looks, just don't find how they provide to us, versus how we do the same thing. So it's all the same oppression.
No. So yeah, I mean, it can feel like the same thing, that you're discriminating on the basis of arbitrary qualities, right? And as the thing popped up, speciesism includes all, right? But I just don't find this helpful.
Well, I mean, it's not. I guess that's the where the dog. It's not about being helpful. It's about being consistent. If you oppose the exploitation,
that's why I don't think it's helpful, because I don't believe it's consistent.
Well, it is, because we oppose the exploitation of all sentient life, and that not only includes the animals in factory farms. It includes the 5 of us on this panel. Am I against the Bushman? I'm for pro-choice.
Right. Well, there you are. You're not consistent then, are you?
Why? I believe in women's right to control or make decisions about their own bodily autonomy. I mean, we're 5 men. I don't think any of us have the right to discuss anyone else's body, but I certainly don't have the right to make a decision about. No, we don't. We're 5 men.
So hang on. Wait.
Can we maybe bring it back on track?
Yeah, but we're 5 men. It's not relevant or okay.
Okay. Can I just say, I think the better word, I think prejudice is the root of the tree. Your prejudice against people, your prejudice against animals. Correct, you see people or animals as beneath you in some way, by the way they look, the way they talk, the noises they make, whatever. So that works for me. Prejudice is the base of the tree, and that does it for me. But that's just the way I look at it.
It could be violence. Now, Ronnie, you've been uncharacteristically quiet.
Well, normally I do a load of talking, so I thought it'd be fair to.
Go for it.
Speak for a while and listen to. It's all been very interesting. I think the idea that somehow vegan education has failed is a misconception. I mean, I've been vegan for 53 years. I've seen tremendous advances, I suppose, in veganism since I first became vegan, both in terms of the number of people that are vegan and also the, how much easier it is these days to live as a vegan. And in actual fact, there's been very little vegan outreach to bring that about. I mean, if you look at the whole history of the movement to protect our fellow animals, I mean, we could go back to the 19th century, couldn't we, the formation of the RSPCA, and then the animal rights movement arose in the 1970s. The idea of vegan outreach in any, I suppose, sort of really tangible way, that kind of only started perhaps 30 years ago, less than 30 years ago, and really it's very small compared with the potential for it if we could encourage and create a framework whereby more vegans could be active in spreading the vegan message. And that's what I'd say about vegan outreach. Now, as far as trying to persuade the government or governments to bring in legislation to, forward the cause of animal liberation or to protect our fellow animals, we've achieved so very little. If you look at, say, something that's much smaller in terms of number of victims, much less powerful in terms of the support for it and the sort of industry behind it. Let's take hunting. Now, the League Against Cruel Sports, they're celebrating, I think, this year their 100th anniversary. They were set up in 1925, campaigning against hunting, and people have been campaigning against hunting even before that. It took almost 80 years to bring in a law banning hunting. As we know, that doesn't properly ban hunting. It's not properly enforced, and they're still going out hunting. And what else have we had from governments? We had a ban on fur farms, but fur can still be imported into this country and sold. And in fact, the main reason why we have such a very small retail industry for fur in this country isn't anything to do with legislation. It's to do with direct action. It's to do with the Animal Liberation Front, or very much to do with that, the actions that were taken against the retail fur industry. I can't really think of are very much apart from that we've had from governments, despite decades and decades of campaigning. So how I've come to it, because I've been involved in all sorts of different campaigns, from Hunt Sabs, ALF, campaigning against whaling, anti-vivisection, greyhound racing industry, and so David and I mentioned earlier, involved with the Green Party in improving their policies on animal protection. And what's occurred to me is we're never going to get anything really meaningful from governments until we change the nature of governments. And if we look, we've got a situation, throughout the world where governments are getting worse and worse. Look at USA, you look at the government in this country, what they're doing, the harm they're causing, say, to people with disabilities with these, new proposals that hopefully will be defeated. Planning laws that want to cause great harm to free living beings. They want to increase, nuclear weapons that would be devastating to all life on Earth, and especially our fellow animals. All these things. Why is this happening? Why have we got governments like that have done so little to protect our fellow animals, despite so much effort by campaigners? Those governments haven't come down from the sky. They've been elected by ordinary people. So unless we fundamentally change the views of ordinary people, that is going to continue forever. And we're always going to get these governments. It's so hard to move them on anything because of their ideological stance. We need people in charge of the administration whose ideology is totally different. It's much more in accordance with what we believe. And unless we change a substantial number of ordinary people, get ordinary people to think radically differently, that's never going to be any different. And that's tackling the problem at a really fundamental level. And I think our movement has failed to do that. We've been very much focused on protest and campaigns to ban things and stuff like that. Now, I'm not saying that those campaigns are necessarily wrong, that there's anything wrong with people doing that, but it's just that we have had so little effort comparatively focused on changing ordinary people. And we don't have to change everyone. The idea that you have to kind of change everyone, get everyone to become vegan, that's not the case. And if you look at the Labour government, was only 20% of people eligible to vote voted Labour. I think in the USA, Donald Trump, it's 30%. We only have to educate a substantial minority, because if people like us don't run the show, then people who are speciesist and human supremacist that have give our fellow animals so little priority and so little concern, they'll always be the ones in charge. So how do we get people like us to be in charge? That's only through education. And that's kind of why I focus so much on vegan outreach. Not that I don't support other campaigns, but that's why that's my focus, because I think unless we do that, we're never going to get very far with any move towards achieving animal liberation.
Okay, so I don't agree with that. I think the reason I don't agree is because I think the analysis is incorrect, and I think that it's incorrect because actually, if we focus on factory farming, we already have a view that the vast majority of people agree with. So we don't need to take people on the journey all the way to understanding speciesism. We can use a popular view, well, it's a twofold popular view, I would say, an understanding that plants are better for your health and factory farming is an abomination. Taken together, that's an incredibly popular message and has proved to be absolutely powerful. And in terms of effort, and this is where I wish Jane was here, She, Jane from Scrap Factory Farming and Humane Being, she brought the first, not just her alone, but other people as well, brought the first legal case that's ever been tried anywhere in the world to challenge factory farming. Now, you're not going to, and that kind of activity has been tried once. All of this education, as you rightly say, Ronnie, a brilliant account of the history. All of this education, getting people to think right, to lead them to right action, has led to what? We've got a fox hunting ban, just about, but that's about it, you know, it's kind of it. So
well, that's you see, that's an example I give, that you had, you know, for decades and decades, the vast majority of ordinary people have been opposed to fox hunting, but it took, you know, almost 80 years of campaigning to ban it, and it still hasn't been banned properly, despite people being opposed to it. So the mere fact that most people, if you ask them, would be opposed to factory farming isn't enough. You need more than that. You actually need politicians that are actually opposed to it. And so how do we get...
It's even better than that. It's even better than that. So I would say you're right. It's not enough that people are against, in a majority, against factory farming. So it's not sufficient that and even having, you know, apparently vegan politicians, not enough. But what's unique about the factory farming thing is that factory farming is uniquely financially fragile. A very small change in the economics has a huge effect. It's not like other things. So you can have huge effect from very minimal effort. My approach, the reason why I like scrap factory farming so much as a proposition, is because it's good engineering. It's minimum effort with maximum result, which is always what you want to be doing from a, you know, just a purely engineering point of
about
view.
Minimum effort.
Well, yeah, it certainly doesn't feel
team
like
works
it, you know
there.
what I mean? It's like there's this structural weakness in factory farming that's built on top of, you know, some very precarious financial, just purely financial. There's other aspects as well, but the purely financial aspect of factory farming is so precarious. Attack that, and you get this huge big win, and then minds might change.
But haven't there been campaigns against factory farming for many years? Actually, World Farming is opposed to factory farming. They've been going since the 1960s, haven't they? Campaigning against factory farming, and how far, you know, did their campaign? How much did their campaign achieve?
Well, they didn't do a they didn't try a legal challenge.
I mean, to what extent that, you know, makes a difference?
Nobody had tried it. So who knew? And like, who says, you know, like
what's been the result?
Time you try something, you got to, you know, you got to keep at that.
What's been the result of the legal challenge?
Sorry, what?
What's been the result of the legal challenge?
Well, it wasn't. So it went through all the courts, all the way up to the European Court where it was debated. Unfortunately, it didn't result in the conclusion that we wanted. But it shows a concrete mechanism. It was able to awaken people to, hang on a minute, we don't have to, you know, convince a load of people. We can act and pursue this goal in a concrete way. And what I think the beauty of this is aligning people's action towards the right outcome, but not requiring that they agree. It's far better that we have a broad church, as it were, than before you can come and help, you must agree to these tenets. That's why I'm against the idea of education as being the route to fixing people's thinking, and then I don't buy it.
But what's the long-term prevention here from, let's just say you manage to be successful in court and you manage to be successful to get these changes? What about when a new regime come in and they just do some different accounting in a different place and say, all the mistakes that we made before, we've learned from them, let's start again? How would that be prevented? Because nobody actually opposed to these actions. They've just had it changed. So the education's vital still.
Oh no, no. Okay, so all right, I'll mitigate what I said slightly. That you know, I'm against the theory that you first need to change everybody's mind and then proceed. I think that a twin track approach that doesn't.
Okay, that makes more sense. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I thought it was a one or the other.
Yeah, absolutely. The only thing I would say is that the popularity of the message against factory farming is predicated on a paradox.
Of course, yeah.
Right? And so it's like, oh, so you could be against factory farming, but, you know, have your own chickens and eat their eggs, right? Now, and obviously, from a vegan standpoint, that's like illogical, right? However, I think that the huge benefit that would come from getting rid of factory farming would have a far more educative effect. Oh, look, people would say, I don't need this. Oh, and look, it's also really expensive. Maybe I'll investigate other options, other choices in how I clothe myself, how I eat, and so on and so forth. So you get your education, ironically, by not educating people.
I understand that. Yeah, that makes more sense.
I was just saying, if you don't educate people, though, to reject the consumption of animal products entirely, if those people are no longer able to obtain the products of factory farming, aren't they going to turn to other products like, you know, fishes, for instance? Won't that?
Oh no, it's genuine. You know, it's a genuine problem.
Yeah.
Problem. I mean, I don't. Yeah, no.
Yeah,
like,
yeah. You see, so you know, that's why. That's why. Whatever else you do, there has to be this strong educative effort to persuade people not to consume animal products. Otherwise, they're just going to
carefully. Because I know from my own personal experience. When I was a youngster, I had a neighbour who scared me rigid about the worms inside meat, using an old encyclopedia because he was vegetarian, and it kept me from even thinking that veganism was an answer for until I was 40 odd, right? So I think people have to come under their own cognizance to this. Frankly, it's a revelation that you can live free from this terrible contradiction. And I think if religion teaches us anything, is that you can't just give people the truth. They have to come to it, and then they go, oh, and then they get all the benefit.
I think you give people the information, they have to make their own mind up, provide them with the information. That's the best you can do. But the other thing I wanted to talk about was to do with the climate, and how we, you know, how we can benefit the environment, combat the climate crisis, and all these things, you know, by ending the consumption of animal products. Now, it's interesting because I think on your website it talks about the Amazon, doesn't it? The the Amazon being destroyed for ranching, but then ranching, that isn't factory farming, is it? It's grazing. And the other thing is, if we look at land use, and I think it's something like 44% of the Earth's habitable land is used for farming.
Yeah.
And 80% of that is used for animal farming, isn't it?
Yeah.
In one way or another. That's either grazing or growing crops. But out of the land used, all this land that's used in conjunction with animal farming, I think it's something like, I worked out, was something like 82.5% of that land is used for grazing. So in terms of us being able to rewild huge areas of land to properly combat the climate and ecological crisis, it could be argued that grazing is actually a greater problem than factory farming.
Wait.
Yeah,
David, have you got
because of land use?
Yeah.
If you see what I mean, the amount of land that's taken up.
I think you're misunderstanding the way
yeah,
we're
could
using the word factory.
Could I chip in here? Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to say, Ronnie, before that we absolutely include the fishes in our document. We got an online document which gives a lot of scientific evidence, but we absolutely recognize the underwater containers or prisons, whatever you want to call them, that trap huge numbers of fish. So fish are factory farmed. And a lot of people do think of it as land animals, but so we absolutely include that. The thing about, well, it's not just the Amazon, but the majority of soya that comes from South America is fed to farmed animals. And if you remove that, you reduce climate change big time. So it's not just could I just I'll finish it. It's not just the methane coming from cows and goats and lambs and all that. It's the soya that's being given to the animals, and the South American forests are being devastated for that purpose. So if we get rid of this industrialized farming, the benefits stretch there. They also stretch to the rivers because of the animal poo going into our rivers. It's not just the water companies, is it? It's, the Environment Agency said 14%. I appreciate we got some people from the States. 14% of UK or English and Wales rivers were fit for marine life. So the poo is harming fishes in the river. So that we just see this, and actually, I do believe there's a place for all of the activism that's being discussed. But if we get rid of that, the benefits are massive.
I mean, you're right. The major, because there was a survey done in government survey done in 2022 into the state of rivers in England, and they came to the conclusion that the main cause of the pollution of those rivers was actually animal farming. There's a lot is said about the water companies allowing human sewage to enter the rivers, but the main cause is actually animal farming. But what I'd say is
the same story about antibiotic resistance.
Yeah.
So everyone says, "Oh, be very careful about taking your antibiotics and finish the course," which is all good advice. But actually, the majority reason for antibiotic resistance is the antibiotics used in animal agriculture.
Oh yes, absolutely. But what I was saying was about regarding land use is a far greater land. It's like 4.5 times more land is taken up by grazing than it is by intensive animal farming. And so you've got a problem of that, that the potential of that in terms of that land being rewilded, being allowed to return to forests in order to draw the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. It's mainly we in that area of concern, it's mainly grazing that's a problem, because it takes up a far greater amount of land than the land used for factory farming.
Yeah. So, well, no. So if you have factory farming, a lot of animals need a lot of feeding. So you have to grow you have to use a lot of land to grow the food that you're going to then feed to your animals. So the fact that one's a field and one's a, like a factory.
I agree with you, but when you look at the stats, the amount of land that's used to grow crops to feed to farmed animals, which would be mainly factory farmed animals, is of the land used for animal farming is only is 17.5%. 82.5% is used for grazing. So you still got a far greater amount of land used for grazing.
Not sure that can be true.
That is, well, I'll tell you where I'd have a look at it.
Where are we getting that?
It's from
also
it's from Our World in Data. Our World in Data, global land for agriculture, and it's all based on.
So what it's able to distinguish between grazing.
What they've done is they've done a breakdown here of there's some researchers. They said that it works out that of the total land used for farming, according when you look at the figures and do some calculations based on the figures, that grazing land is 66% and land used for crops to feed animals is 14%.
Yes.
Far more land is used for. I appreciate that's only one aspect of the problem.
Well, so it's one aspect, absolutely, and then the other thing is, hang on a minute, those animals that are grazing, that doesn't mean that's not factory farming.
Well, I suppose it depends what happens to them when they're not out in the field grazing, doesn't it?
Indeed.
But it's about the amount of land that's used for.
Because that's the thing that like they're, what's the phrase they use? The grass finished.
But that's based on land, the amount of land.
Yes.
So whether those animals spend half their time in a factory farm or not doesn't change it. Doesn't change the amount of land that's used. For when you compare land that's just grazing land compared with land that's used for
grazing land is land being used by the factory farming process that we are trying to scrap.
Even if you set that aside, and that's a fascinating discussion. Even if you set that aside, the soya grown in South America is propping up factory farming. Because that's where it all comes. That's where their feed comes from.
I don't dispute that, but I'm just saying that in terms of the climate, in terms of the environment, in terms of the ecological crisis, all animal farming is a problem. All of it's a problem, and so we need to challenge. We do need to challenge all of it. And you may think that all right, challenging factory farming first is the way to do that. But all of it's a problem, and the reason we have any sort of animal farming is because humans consume animal products, and so we do have to educate humans, or a substantial number of humans, no longer to do that and to look at our fellow animals in a completely different way, so that we can have a change in the administration. Because it's like we bang our heads constantly against the brick wall of government. All this legislative change we've wanted all through the years, and all these issues. It might help if I didn't knock my microphone over.
It's a very passionate subject. No question.
Yeah. So, and the problem is we have done nothing as a movement to change the nature of government. And so all the time we've banged ahead. I mean, the government's either refusing to pass laws to protect animals and making our fellow animals, making things worse for our fellow animals, or passing laws to make it harder to protest, aren't they? It's all been the other way.
So hang on. So the trick is, I think, so the answer to the question from Jack Will is Good Neville, that's me, a vegan? Yes, I am. So the thing is, to choose where to put one's effort, right? There's loads of things we would like to change, and we've got limited effort. You know, we've only got so many people with so much time to work on this problem. So the trick surely to have a force multiplier. So start with something that people understand, right? Now,
I mean, I understand.
Right?
I understand.
So here's the big problem.
I understand we need to
you
have,
get that, right? But here's the big problem.
Yeah.
You can't trick people. It doesn't work. So, for example, if we said at scrap, oh, by the way, this scrap thing, that's actually a stalking horse to sell you a whole load of other ideologically connected ideas, right? That would completely undermine what we're trying to do. But a tactical, clever use of popular force against the weakness of a contradictory system is our best chance of starting the starting a conversation in the around the things we might want. And so, just to give you like a particularly ridiculous example of this very small little thing we could do. So, for example, if CO2 wasn't available in canister form, the pig slaughtering business would have to end. Similarly, it would seem chickens. And the fact that the supply of CO2 became critical during the pandemic nearly led to the ending of pig slaughter, right? That's what we're talking about. And why can't we think hard about this as an engineering problem rather than this chat?
I don't think it nearly ended pig slaughter. I think it would have ended pigs being slaughtered in a gas chamber. They'd have just reverted to another method.
No, that's the thing. This is the thing about factory farming, right? The economics don't work unless you do it at a vast scale, right? That's why factory farming. That's why we focus.
But for example, why couldn't they just replace the gas with argon, for example, or something else? Pay a little bit more money, but are you going to lose your entire industry for like an extra pound of canister?
That's what I'm saying to you is that's what happened, and there was as a result of it, they managed to get like a subsidy, and the government stepped in. But that's just to illustrate the whole industry is hanging on.
You just said something
on the edge.
You just said something there which was very relevant. That the government stepped in. Mm-hmm. So let's try and create a government that doesn't step in.
Okay, well,
and how do you do that? Unless we do that, we are going. How many more decades are we going to be banging our heads against the brick wall of resistant governments? Unless we do something fundamentally to change the nature of the administration, and you can only do that by changing a substantial number of, a reasonable minority, at least, of ordinary people. That's the only way you can do that. We don't look at things at a fundamental enough level. That's the only way. Otherwise, we're going to be carrying on getting these tiny morsels, if anything, from the government in terms of protecting our fellow animals. Unless we change the very nature, we have to think bigger. We have to think, how do people like us, how do we get to run the show? Because until people like us run the show, we're never going to get very much.
If we, I'm with you on that one, Ronnie. But I mean, that seems like, I think if you're talking about changing the political system, that's probably even longer off into the future than the educational piece. However, if you're coming from the angle of we need the right people in government, that I think that's one of the things we're trying to do. So we've had lots of conversations with Terry Jeremy, and he's been speaking up in Parliament about this, and he says we need to debate this openly. And I know there's, well, we probably all know Kerry McCarthy, very passionate about this. There's Alex Sobel's been talking about it. And so we're trying to build up enough MPs to change things.
Yeah.
So it might not change the political system, but if we get enough people in Labour who care about it, we may end up with a better cabinet.
Yeah, I mean,
But I do agree with
the,
you. The legal changes have been painfully slow.
Yeah, you see, and that's the thing, and I think this is a mistake we have made as a movement, that we've never looked at. Had we changed things at the most fundamental of levels, we've never had all down through the decades. We've never looked at that unless we're the people that run the show, we're never going to get. You know, if we've got people that believe that, you know, humans are entitled to exploit and oppress our fellow animals, if they're the people in government, if they're the people in charge, how much are you going to be able to get out of them in terms of protecting other animals?
Well, yeah, but that's why I think changing the type of minister or moving those ministers forward into more in the center of the government is a good way to go, because they can change things from the inside. I mean, I've trained I trained DEFRA under the last government 3 times as an audit. They were an audit team, and that's one of the things I trained. And there were a couple of people there who didn't like it one bit. Rest of them weren't that bothered. But I spent time talking to those 2 people, and we've kept in touch. And I think that's a good way to go, because you are getting an educational piece, but coming from the top down. I think Roger and I were talking about this. You know, if education of people is going that way, and our systemic change, and actually, the more I think about it, is a systemic education, the two can work together. When I, like a lot of people, I guess, on this call, I've done animal rights marches, really passionate, and go around London and Brighton with the chant. The most moving thing I've ever seen, again, I'm sure people have done this, was witness a truckload of pigs in a vehicle being led to the slaughterhouse. I will never forget the look on those pigs' eyes looking through the slats. They just want, we've got to get them out. We've got to get them out. I mean, I have total respect for the people who do that in sanctuaries, and they bring them to sanctuaries. It's lovely, and I've visited them. They can't wait for this education piece. And so I think where I'm coming from, and the scrap team, who, by the way, are predominantly women, as it was mentioned before, where we're coming from, and I think Wendy said, well, we're not welfareists, we're all vegans in our group, is we get to this point where that goes, and it's still a tall order. And the education piece is long term, like people have been saying, get it into schools, totally agree. The two should work well together. We can't wait for long-term change in education and long-term changing in the political system.
But otherwise,
something.
But the evidence of the past is that, you know, getting change through legislation, even the smallest of changes in, you know, comparison to the whole scenario of the exploitation of our fellow animals, that takes ages. Decades and decades. That's what we've learned from history, isn't it? History of campaigning towards governments. It takes ages, and then when you get the legislation, it ends up being very, very weak.
Well, aren't you guys all like saying the same idea? Which is that once you have a principle, then you fashion your legislative agenda around it, and then you are able to have the energy necessary to achieve the overall goal. So slavery would be a great example. Once you've accepted the principle that humans shouldn't be slaves, right, then you've got the sort of moral energy, as it were, to carry that forward. My very, very gentle critique of speciesism is it doesn't provide that moral energy necessary to carry enough opinion. Now, Scrap seeks to solve that problem by saying we don't really need a principle which informs all of our thinking. We can have lots of different principles, lots of related principles. That's what the reason why it's called Scrap is, for the letters of, you know, for the SCRAP, five reasons why, you know,
on the website.
See the website. So so that's how it solves the problem. The other way to do it, which is the way that I don't think will get much popularity here, is to found the principle necessary. The undergirding principle is a right to life, which, if you put that together with anti-euthanasia, which is, you know, then we have very broad popular support for it, and would potentially provide the kind of energy necessary to carry forward this idea. It's at the moment, the vegan movement is fatally fractured and divisive, and without either everybody becoming speciesist, you know, or you know what I mean, everybody accepting the speciesism principle, without that principle, you being accepted, it's not doing the work it needs to do, which is providing moral force, providing moral energy. So that's why Scrap is because it tries to subvert, it tries to get round that lack of a single guiding principle. It says, well, you can you can lend your shoulder to this wheel on all sorts of fronts. So it's a question of moral force, and I suggested two working ones. Scrap is one. There's another one based on the right to life, and the third one, speciesism as a principle, I think lacks this, what I'm calling moral force.
Okay, before we go on, folks, I want to just do a little bit of housekeeping. We're 8 minutes over the hour, and there's a couple of things in the comments that I wanted to bring up. I've been noting them, and then there's several points that seem to need some clarification or seem to need something more. So are we okay to continue, or do you think a part two is in order?
Part two, I'm kind of tempted to say, but I can hold on. But anyway,
there's something I really.
Hang on, Ronnie. Can we resolve that bit first? Are we okay to carry on, everybody?
If we carry on a bit and have a part.
Carry on a bit, because I think we could finish off today without a part two. Which I think would be better.
Okay, but I do want to bring in the questions that have been raised in the audience.
One thing I'd like to say quickly is that when people consume animal products, they're mostly consuming the products of factory farming, aren't they? You know, like the vast majority of our fellow animals that are used for food are factory farmed. Yeah. So, as part of your campaign, could you not say something like, one way that you can help as an individual is by not consuming the products of factory farming, by not, paying into that industry, in addition to everything else you're doing, because I know that that's what Humane Being says, and that you're part of Humane Being, but that you have to kind of click to go to a separate website, and I don't see that kind of statement I've just made included in what Scrap Factory Farming says.
You're right, Ronnie, and there's a reason for that. Is we've talked about this at length in so many meetings over the last few years, and the reason is we decided we weren't going to focus on the individual. Our campaign was all about systemic change. And that's why we do. And humane being, as you say, is in the background, and that's a philosophy.
Yeah.
But this is not about.
See, what I would say is that you can't get systemic change without individual change, because it's the individual people who are the voters, and that's what determines how the system operates. So the whole idea of that individual change and systemic change being separate, I think, is like a fallacy.
And that's precisely what I was concerned about. Like, let's just say, hypothetically, we could magic wand, factory farming, including the other things that you've brought into that bracket, they're all eradicated from tomorrow. We have 8 years of this not being around. And then we have some absolute arsehole like Farage come and say, vote for me and I will give you your flesh back. Without the education, that's something that's going to get someone elected. So like there has to be, that education needs to be happening whilst this is going on. Otherwise, you're going to have a real job on your hands once that change comes in, to make sure it's not changed back again. That would be my real concern.
I think that's a really good point. I'd like to respond to it.
Yeah, go on.
Oh, sorry, Neville. We're also enthusiastic to talk. So, Roger, it's been really interesting discussion. I just wanted to say to that, I totally accept that. However, the government's always going to be prone to that. But when I came into this discussion, my thoughts were that all this can work together. And I'm not being, Mr. Diplomatic for the sake of it. I honestly think the education piece, the people that go around the streets, I think Jem Lettuce on TikTok does an amazing job. People who go around trying to educate on the streets. I love that. And I just think this can all work together. We chip away at all sides.
No, I agree with that part completely. And please don't take offense to me saying this, but I just don't see that scrap is like a vegan issue. Your audience are like the vegetarians. As you've already said, we only have a small amount of time and effort, right? So vegan education is only being done by the vegans. Nobody else is doing it. And so if we focus our attention on this instead, then there's no vegan education. But genuinely, all the things that you've said, the vegetarians agree with. They don't do any activism.
But Andy, where on earth do you get the idea that our audience is vegetarian?
Because think about the things that you're looking about taking away.
But, sorry,
they would be in agreement with you.
You're incorrect. We've got a database of 800 supporters, and I can pretty much tell you.
No. You're misunderstanding what I'm saying. I'm not saying that you're appeasing vegetarians. I'm saying those are the people that should be supporting you the most, because they already agree with you. They don't buy flesh.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah. I'm not saying like, that you're speaking on behalf of the vegetarians or accusing you of being one. What I'm saying is those are the people that should be supporting and doing your activism, and the few vegans that exist should be doing vegan outreach.
That's fine, but I think people can do lots of things. And when I give talks in schools and when I give talks in universities, I'm not always necessarily representing scrap factory farming. I do sometimes, but
because
I
in
just
fairness,
think
they're a big part of the population,
together.
Right?
Sorry,
vegetarians, they're a big part of the population.
Well, I'm not
they're
sure
a very quiet
big.
Well,
vegetarian and vegan together is what, about, is it 8%? 10%.
There's more vegetarians than vegans, though, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely.
So,
but it's
what I'm
painfully slow. It's painfully slow.
Absolutely.
And that's why we do what we do. It's painfully slow. People aren't converting to it at any rate quick enough that it's going to be helpful to animals.
But that's because of the lack of vegan education, and I think a lot more could be done to encourage more vegan education, by national organizations, by the global groups. There could be a lot more resources put into it, a lot more encouragement given to it, so the potential for it is a lot greater than what it is at the moment. The other thing about vegan education is I spoke about the long-term effect of it in terms of changing the culture of society, changing the administration. But there's also short term. If I one of the reasons I do vegan outreach is because it's the one way that I can personally spare the most animals in the short term. Because every person in the UK that you persuade to become vegan, or at least to stop consuming animal products, that reduces the demand for our fellow animals to be exploited and slaughtered by almost 100 per person per year. So in terms of, I was going to choose, what am I going to do, in my spare time? Am I going to work at a rescue? Am I going to kind of go outside a vivisection laboratory and campaign? Am I going to do vegan outreach? The way I can, in the short term, spare the most number of animals is by doing vegan outreach. So there's a short term gain through it, and then this, much longer term gain of changing the culture of society.
Wouldn't the if you were going effort to number of animals saved, wouldn't it actually, nobody's going to like this, be better to encourage people to be vegetarian on the basis that if there's nobody to consume the cows, the whole model breaks down and you won't be able to produce milk. And then that whole part of the industry collapses. Then you've rescued the land, and so on, and so it goes. So you probably don't want to play that game because it doesn't work out the way you would like it to work.
I don't really see that these days that it's any easier to persuade someone to be vegetarian than it is to actually persuade them.
Well, there are certainly more vegetarians than there are vegans.
There are more vegetarians than vegan, but I wonder how many of those.
It's easier to persuade someone to be vegetarian than vegan.
I'm just wondering how many of those vegetarians have.
I mean, actually, you could do even easier. You could just move people over to oat milk, right? Just make drinking milk, just stop that, and then the whole of the cow industry collapses. This is the thing I keep finding very hard to communicate. I don't know why exactly.
Yeah, but I think
like there are these very tiny tactical things if we want to do this. But I sense that people would rather think right first before doing anything. And I think that's why we're in the state we're in.
I mean, I'd say the actual situation with outreach is that although you're putting forward, the idea that why we shouldn't consume animal products, why, humans shouldn't exploit other animals, that what actually happens is people tend personally to go as far as with that as they can, if you see what I mean. And so what you're doing is, if you're just educating someone not to consume oat milk, then you're kind of restricting them in terms of how far they go. Whereas if you put forward the total message, people will choose themselves how far they go in and not restricting them.
So of course you could do it wrong, but the point is, if it's a question of tactical choices about what's with the maximum effect that don't require ideological conformity, you're going to be more popular. You're going to have more impact. It's that simple.
But then how does that work in changing the nature of the administration? Because that's based on, because politics is based on ideology, isn't it? The ideology.
No, I don't think it is.
They believe in. You have certain parties have, they're defined by what they believe in. And so if we have enough people in politics that actually believe in animal liberation, then you're much likely to have the right sort of legislation going through.
Maybe not. I mean, if you really want change, if you look historically, being Christian is the most useful principle driving change. So slave trade, for example. Without that kind of moral clarity and moral force, change doesn't happen. So my alternative, and if you like, what I think the scrap approach is to say, well, we don't actually mind ideologically where you're at with this stuff. The goal should be to save the animals, which is where we came in, and as many as quickly as possible. How you cognize that is your human privilege.
But vegan education says that, doesn't it? That's the way that the best
More
thing
human privilege
as an individual, isn't it?
No, all that individual stuff, all that human education, thinking right, ideology, it's all just human privilege talk. I'm saying we could do these things, save more animals that animals would understand. Maybe I'm wrong, but
well, I just think that the one thing that an individual person can do to spare the most of our fellow animals from suffering and slaughter is to become vegan, isn't it?
oh yeah, no, if you're talking an individual, no question, absolutely.
Yeah, and then individuals together, create a culture and
no
create an administration.
That's where you mistake, I think. They don't need a cult. They don't need to agree. Well, they do need to agree on some fundamental principles, but you probably don't want those fundamental principles. So the alternative is to not have to worry about what their motivations for doing the right thing is. That's it.
But with vegan education, you give people a motivation, don't you?
That's a motivation. That's not a principle.
Yeah, well, it's a principle and a motivation.
No, it isn't a principle, unless you're going to bring them up Christian.
Oh no, veganism is a principle. It's a philosophy. It's a justice movement, isn't it? It is a principle.
I'm not sure that it is. No.
Well, I mean, what could be a more principled principle than opposition to all exploitation and oppression? I'm sure that's
it's just as we've shown. It's not. It's full of contradictions. So it's not a principle.
Well, the idea of being opposed to, within that, people may have a difference of opinion of what constitutes those things, but the idea of
that's why it's not a principle. If it's not a principle, if it can be like, oh, my opinion of it, your opinion of it, that's not how principles work. Either it's a principle with moral force sufficient to take action on a long term. It's got to be non-contradictory, as Christianity was with slavery, right? It gave people the moral force to keep at that thing for generations. That's what, that through line is what I'm talking about when I talk about veganism. Isn't that
the principle of veganism as laid down by the founders of the vegan movement is Donald Watson said it was opposition to the exploitation of all sentient life. To me, that's very much a principle, isn't it?
No. Principle's got to be something you're prepared to lay your life down for, to have the sort of moral force we're talking about.
Isn't that what?
So you think people are going to be prepared to lay their life down to end factory farming? Is that what you're saying?
No, that's exactly why I'm saying factory farming is an alternative to this. So as I see it, there are two choices. Either you have a right to life principle, right? A Christian informed by Christianity, right? Now that would give you the moral force and the popular broad appeal, right? But that seems a little bit difficult to come by. The alternative is to build a movement out of lots and lots of kind of reasons. So it's not principle based, it's reason based. So in the case of scrap, it's the letters of scrap: suffering, climate, pollution, antibiotic resistance, pandemic, and disease, for starters, right? And the genius of it is that it skips round this problem. It says we don't need to all agree exactly why we're in this, so that vegetarians, plant-based, vegans, radical vegans, can all cohere around a set of actions. That's why I'm doing it, because it doesn't require of me to have to agree with you ideologically. And I think that freedom is, you know, very important to me as a human. That's why I'm defending it. That's why I think alternatives, even though some of them I think are probably more powerful, are less useful.
Yeah, I mean, just quickly, our founders did lay their lives on the line for the vegan principle. They didn't know that they weren't going to die. They didn't have any of this information. They chose to do it because it was the right thing to do. Have you ever looked at any of this, or did you just decide to redefine veganism to suit?
Sorry, what?
Well, at least 3 times now, you've dismissed veganism based on your opinion.
No, I haven't.
You have. We've listened to you do it. So what's this based on? What's this based on?
What is it? Me saying that I don't think it's a principle? Yeah.
It's only based on your idea. I mean, Ronnie's correct. We're talking about the principle of justice, and that's not being addressed. So it is based on a principle.
I don't think justice is a principle either.
You don't?
No.
Okay. But I guess that's where we're going to disagree here.
Yeah. So just to be clear, the reason I'm talking about principle, right, is because principle is something with sufficient moral force to carry you across generations to get the job done. So slavery is the perfect example, right? Fair enough?
Right.
So Christian principles underwrote.
Well, hang on. Christian principles still say that slavery is okay.
No, absolutely they don't.
Well, hang on. The KKK are a fundamentalist creation group that use the Bible to justify their actions, and they think that people of color should still be slaves. So, like, come on, we can still look at these examples where people cite the same book and the same scripture to do absolutely abhorrent things. I don't base my morality on Christianity. I don't think that plays any basis here.
All right, fine, okay, right. Our conversation's at an end then.
I mean, if that's where you're saying it is, but I don't think it's fair for you to say that everyone's got to subscribe to this, and if you don't, that's the end of the conversation.
No, that's exactly what I'm saying. I don't have to agree with you, and you don't have to agree with me, and that's why Scrap is so clever. It's because it doesn't require us to agree before doing something. That's why it's good. It's good in the world we live in, where I don't agree with you, you don't agree with me, but we can agree that scrapping factory farming for these reasons is where we can put our effort. And what do we get? Less dead animals en masse.
Well, we haven't established that, but can we go to the questions perhaps? I think most of them might be directed to you, Neville. You seem to have ruffled a few feathers, if we can say that in a vegan forum. First off, that I noticed was from Wendy. Interested to hear what Neville thinks is useful, if not looking at speciesism as a prejudices.
I think that, I mean, it might be. I don't know. But the point is we're trying to save maximum number of animals. How we think about that is not relevant to the business of saving the maximum number of animals. So having a contentious definition is a great way to make matters harder, not easier. So if we set up a rule that says we're not gonna have an undergirding principle that we all have to cohere to so that we can move forward, it is the best way to get to action. Hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, okay. And then, well, yeah, I'm trying to keep my mouth shut, so I'll go to this one. My question to good Neville is, who is asking for people to already be vegan before doing plant-based food system activism?
Who is asking for people to already be vegan? Well, I agree. That's what happened to me. I was plant-based and then saw that, well, what was good for me being plant-based was also good for animals.
Yeah, I think you were saying something on the grounds of you're not asking people to sign up to a belief system or principle in order to take part, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So if you get to the idea that, hang on a minute, I'm plant-based and there's all this pollution and climate risk and I should lend my weight to the to scrap, right? Brilliant, you can do that. Whereas you couldn't lend your weight to vegan education because you fundamentally doesn't.
No, well, that raises an issue that I've noted that has come up out of the conversation. There's really some really interesting points that has come up over the kind of over the hour, really. I first of all, I wanted to something that David said. Let me see if I can add this. Now, this is Ginny Messina, and she did a series based on this idea of the power of ethics. So, David, you were saying that the animals don't care. I had a kind of debate on a radio show several years ago with Paul Watson, and he was saying the same thing. The animals don't care. The research suggests that if people, this is Tom Reagan's revolving door. He was always worried that in the movement we got a lot of people joining and we got a lot of people leaving, and we're not very good at retaining. The research suggests that ethical vegans, and I know that's a contentious title, but ethical vegans tend to stay vegan, whereas your health vegans and your environmental vegans don't. So the research suggests, and there's not a lot of it, I'm not trying to say that there is, the research suggests that if somebody comes into the movement on any basis, that's okay, but they need to then engage with the ethics and as quick as possible in order for them to remain vegan.
Isn't it?
I totally agree with that. Yeah, there's no doubt in my mind that that's true. It's if you go plant-based for your health, because you get people on social media, don't you, saying, "Oh, I used to be vegan and I got really ill and I left it." Well, we all know that once you identify with animals on a sentient level, once you realize that they shouldn't be confined and exploited for human gain, that's not possible. So I'm not sure if my comment came across in the right way, Roger, but what I was getting at was the suffering in factory farming at the moment, as I know we all agree, is abominable. And what I'm saying is, when they're rescued, they don't care about our moral stance. They've got no consequence of it.
Yeah.
And so the whole point is to get to the point. We all want to live in a world where no animals are harmed, where they're not exploited, where they're free.
I think
That's what we
they
all
are not used. Isn't that the clearer way to say it?
Yeah, not used, exploited. I mean, to me, they're the same thing. But yeah, not used is fine. And what's the quickest way of getting there? And I mean, I totally get the education thing, and actually, I don't want that to go. But I think in parallel, the end factory farming, and as I said before, Animal Rising have switched their whole approach. They're doing the same, because the speed at which it could make a change would be phenomenal, which would then leave people in more of a position who don't get it at the moment to become used to the idea and think, actually, I've never liked this. I've never, but I was constrained by habit. Because we're creatures of habit, aren't you? And
well, you're raising issues that I mean, obviously we talked about this last week, and obviously you didn't like the video that I put out on TikTok, and essentially I was suggesting that we need a division of labor in much the same way as Ronnie and Andy has said, in the sense that there's not many vegans, and the idea then would be for the vegans to concentrate on veganism. And so if somebody wants to do something which is not vegan, and I think we would probably suggest that scrap factory farming is not veganism.
It's not a vegan campaign, no. I
No,
mean,
okay.
we're totally honest
so
about that. But it is run by a team of passionate
Yeah.
vegans.
Well,
and I can assure you of that.
Well, the thing is, the vegetarian societies the vegetarian societies in the recent years have been run by vegans by and large. But that doesn't mean that vegans need to support vegetarian campaigning. And so my argument was that, okay, let's have a division of labor here. And even this thing about work together as an alliance, if you like, we could talk about that. But the more vegans who get diverted from doing veganism, because there's so small a population, that's worst, according to this position that Ronnie and Andy takes, right?
Yeah, I don't agree with that.
Yeah, I mean we did get very upset about the announcement you made on TikTok, because we thought it was quite destructive, because none of us know in this virtual room or anyone watching what will achieve the best result. None of us do. And what if our approach does get to where we want to get to quicker? Then why would you want to harm it? And that's what we felt you were criticizing.
I mean, that is supposition and speculation. We, like you say, we don't know.
That's what I said. We don't know.
Yeah, and we could all say that. But I mean, you've said, I think several times, Neville said that the end of factory farming would bring about huge benefits. But there's nothing to suggest that that's true, is it? Is there?
But equally, you can't give me a year. Well, everyone will be so well educated that they won't do what we don't want them to do.
No, but then we're back to Ronnie's point, which is the fact that vegan education historically has only just started by a small group of people, and it's only, as Andy said, it's only the vegans that will do it. And so we've got this thing where the only people who will do it are small in population already, and they're being divided because they are deciding to do other stuff like scrap factory farming, and as you say, that's not a vegan campaign. And so I wish your campaign well. I just wish that vegans wouldn't be part of it.
But well, that's okay to have a wish, but many are, because they understand what we're trying to do. They understand they understand that what we're doing is not against veganism. It's not a welfarist movement at all. It's a campaign. It's a political campaign. And so that's why we felt it was destructive. And we have got loads of vegan supporters. And the reality is, as I'm sure we all know, is you talk veganism to people and the brick wall goes up. If you say to them, what do you think about factory farming?
That depends on how they do it. But
if you ask about factory farming, most the people get it. And I work all over the country.
Yeah, but what does that mean though, David? And Neville said the same, that most people are already opposed to factory farming. Now, in our first watch along that we did as part of this series, we were looking at the research. Somebody who works in the USA was saying that if you look at research and people are asked, are you opposed to factory farming? Do you want to see the closure of slaughterhouses? They'll say yes. And then if they get asked, do you still want to keep consuming flesh? They'll say yes, because they don't have a very kind of good way of connecting the two issues. And so just because a lot of people will answer that they're opposed to factory farming doesn't actually mean anything.
It doesn't.
No, I mean, that's a fair point. Just looking at, is it Lee or Leah? I'm not sure, but we're not focusing on welfare. We are. I don't know if you've been listening to the whole thing. We are not focusing on welfare. We are trying to achieve what everyone in this room and audience is trying to achieve, and we think it'll be quicker.
That's why we're doing it. Yeah. Also, this idea that. So let me get this straight. So unless, I just find it. So unless you're ideologically entirely on the same page as you guys, then you're not properly a vegan. And
who said that?
This is what I'm drawing from what you're saying, that there's a series of ideological commitments that you're suggesting I have to make. And that then once I've made those, then I'm sort of allowed into vegan club, and inside vegan club, then I can start educating others to become vegan too. And then when I've convinced enough others in this ideological commitment, then the world will just flip over. It's just Marxism you're describing, and I'm not doing that.
You make it sound as though you think veganism is a bad idea, Neville.
No, because I think what your definition of veganism is mistaken.
I don't have one. I go based on the
have an idea of what veganism is.
If you let me finish the sentence, I go by what the pioneers, the people who started the vegan movement, what they said veganism is. And as Ronnie said, 1945, Donald Watson said the object of the vegan society is to oppose the exploitation of sentient life. And then through a process of kind of thinking out loud through the pages of The Vegan, Leslie Cross kind of evolved vegan philosophy. And that really ended in 1954 with a brilliant essay called The Surge of Freedom. And so if we want to look at the core of vegan values, vegan views, then it was set out by the people who started the vegan social movement. Now, it's kind of weakened since then. The definition that everybody knows, veganism is a philosophy and lifestyle and that is a kind of weaker version of what the pioneers said. But that's another matter. That's kind of what happens to social movements when they grow, you know. And interestingly, to your point, is the fact that one threat to a social movement is that when more and more people come in, they come in with all different ideas and values. And so the core ideas may be threatened, right? Now, you might say, well, that's just something that a social movement's got to deal with, but it's not ideal for those core values, because the more people coming into the movement calling themselves vegan who don't have the core values of veganism is a threat to veganism. And I think we've seen that within the vegan movement.
Yeah, that's Marxism, isn't it? That's like, unless you hold this specific definition, you're against the definition, and you're therefore, it's the no true Scotsman fallacy.
Well, when you could put it that way, it's a negative way of putting it, but veganism has got to mean something, hasn't it? It can't just mean what everybody says it means.
So I think this is why scrap isn't a vegan movement, right?
Yeah, right. Okay.
Right. It isn't. And the reason it isn't is because veganism has this purity test that limits outreach, and the cost of that is that you can't do political action.
No, it's not. It's the fact that we're back to David's thing about we could work together. So people want to do.
I'm not sure we can. I mean,
are you serious?
I think we can.
Absolutely, yeah. Because fundamentally, it doesn't actually matter whether I agree with you about scrap factory farming. You know, like the fundamental reason for working in that space does not require that we agree. Whereas it would seem for me to be a Roger Yates vegan or a 1945 vegan requires of me all sorts of agreements, which I'm not prepared to give.
Well, it doesn't really require very much. It just requires that you're opposed to the exploitation. How is that a lot to be opposed to the exploitation of fellow animals?
I don't accept this speciesism idea, for example.
Well, on what basis? You don't think it's wrong for? You don't believe it's wrong for humans to be prejudiced against their fellow animals? Is that what you don't believe?
No, because that's not what speciesism is. It's part of a whole story about it's illegitimate apparently to make any distinctions between any parties at all, and I'm not party to that.
Yeah, but that's not what it is. It's a prejudice, isn't it? It's
you're saying that any kind of prejudice is the same prejudice. So racism is the same as transphobia, is the same as sexism.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying speciesism is.
Yeah, you really are.
Speciesism is the view that humans are somehow superior to other sentient animals.
Okay, well, that's good enough. I don't agree with that.
Yeah. Well, that's
right.
Well,
so I don't agree with that. Right. So there we are. I don't agree. Am I now not a vegan?
Well, according to the if you believe that it's wrong for humans to exploit our fellow
No, I didn't say exploit. Didn't say exploit. I said that the idea that humans and animals have, fundamentally the same rights. We
haven't got the same rights because our capabilities are different. So,
for example,
but the right not to be.
I think actually it was superior, wasn't it? You said that speciesism was humans are superior to animals. Yeah. So fundamentally, I don't agree with that.
You don't agree that humans are superior to our fellow animals?
No, that are not. So I think
you think you're superior.
Are superior to animals.
On what moral and rational basis do you believe that?
I'm not going to want the answer.
Well, let's have it anyway.
It's Christian ethics.
Yeah, but then the whole argument could be based on the fact.
I told you didn't want to hear it, and that's why I don't agree with you.
Yeah.
So just accept that I don't agree with you, and I have a reason.
Yeah, I accept that you believe in a religion that I would regard as hocus pocus, but there we are.
Thank you for your understanding there. Thank you. So it's super important to me, and you're mocking it. So thank you very much for that.
I'm not. My attitude to it is no different to my attitude to someone who believes in Santa or the Tooth Fairy. To be quite honest, I believe that they're just as credible.
So look, let's try and be respectful, shall we?
Yeah.
So I don't agree with speciesism, right, as a frame for understanding things. Therefore, am I not vegan?
Ronnie, you're still doing criminal damage, I see.
I know. This mic's got a life of its own.
I'm going to have to. I think this is probably as long as I could extend this for. Are we going to close the discussion?
We could. You dying for a pee, are you, David?
Well, I need to start cooking, to be honest.
Oh, right. Okay.
I went before, when I went off screen.
Oh, right. Okay. Yes.
That's when I did it. Yes.
Yeah. That classifies as too much information, but there you go. So, all right. Well, obviously we could continue, and perhaps but we're going to have to draw it to a close sometime. So this is perhaps a good moment. So I'd like to thank everyone for taking part, and I particularly would like to thank everybody for tuning in and contributing. Apologies if I missed anything. There's a possibility that I did, but but you know, perhaps we could revisit that some other time. And maybe, I don't know, 6 months down the road, we might do this again or something, but we'll see. Okay, so if you stick in the green room, as we're supposed to call it, when I close down, you'll still be online with us. Or if you've had enough of us, you can just go straight away. So, so I want to say then to everyone again, thanks very much. Thanks again for the audience participation, and thanks in advance for people who are going to watch the recording. So we'll see you again, folks. Bye for now.
Thank you very much,
Bye,
Roger.
cheers.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.